In the first reading, we have a teaching which is valid for all time and is very profound. Saul thought to be doing the Lord a favour by offering the best of the booty as a holocaust and sacrifice to him, but it was in disobedience to a clear command that all should be consumed. And this has been picked up by the commentators over the centuries in the monastic life and elsewhere. It hinges on the essence of the spiritual life. All, with regard to our service of the Creator, can be, if we're not careful, a throwing of sand in His eyes if one thing is not handed over, the will. When teaching his many novices, and he had many, St. Maximilian Kolbe put on the blackboard his own formula. I changed the letters because it wouldn't correspond to what he had in Polish. In English it would be holiness, H, exists when and only when small w, the will, equals, and the underlined equals, in all things without exception, big will, big W, the will. Now the will is influenced by the intelligence, and the intelligence is influenced by the imagination, and it's through the imagination the devil can play on the other levels. He has influence over the imagination. If you don't believe me, go into the Desert Fathers, and they knew what they had to do with. It was to do with the imagination, the video of the mind. That's where the devil started to play. And actually we have it in the visions of Anne Catherine Emmerich, that she was shown in detail the temptations of the Lord in the desert. And the devil was able to, for instance, manifest himself as someone that the Lord knew, who was in trouble, who needed help, and so on. In other words, he could produce an image. I want to zoom into what happens when both these go wrong, and then also the rest follows, because the will led into error collapses, and a cosmic failure can ensue. The Lord founded a church, the continuation of the incarnation and redemption on earth until the end of time, a sacramental system which will perpetuate all the force of Bethlehem and Calvary, the Trinity at work saving souls. And we know how the saints perceived that. The language that Padre Pio had about the sacrifice is actually quite fascinating. He saw it as holding up the world. And it's already the case, because through perpetuation of Calvary, there's never been a moment in history practically where somewhere on earth it's not been offered. So it can be said, the Holy Mass is sustaining the world somewhere, all the time. So, that same evil force which wishes us harm wants to destroy it. He wants to stop it happening, and he can succeed. When the breakage of 1054 took place, it was thought to be a passing tiff between two bishops. Alas, it spread to other bishops in the East and is still with us to this day. Only a short pause happened at the Council of Ferrara, Florence, 1438-1439, which was actually pressurized by concern from Constantinople that they were going to be taken over by the Muslim invasion. So they knew they had to have help from the West, and they were willing at that point to go along with an ecumenical council once again to solve the problem. And on paper it did happen, and it's recognized also as an ecumenical council. But on returning, it was not accepted at grassroots level, and therefore, and they said actually when they got back, the local people, we would rather be under the Saracens than under Rome. And a few years later, that was the case. 1453 it fell, and now we know the situation. Okay, they carried on. They can never ever happen as we can to have an ecumenical council, because without Peter it cannot be, and evermore they can be divided amongst themselves, as we've seen now recently between Russia, Moscow and Constantinople. Often questions of juridical order, but still they're serious enough. And although they've got the sacraments, they are actually pretty nationalistic. They don't have the notion that we do of going to any Catholic church throughout the world and feeling quite at home. But they've got the sacraments. Therefore, the life continues, and there is divine life there and sanctity. Indeed, it's quite heroic in the monastic life quite often, and they're very faithful. Closer to us, and this is where I want to land, it happened in a different way. Those responsible were those who knew. Gifted people who had influence. I suppose the turning point really is Martin Luther. Things starting with lights of purification within, starting to heat up by 1517, 1521 it's getting really heated up, and then new dynamics come in. And by the way, I know what I'm talking about because I used to study things in the writings when I was in France, and you can see the evolution in the writings of Martin Luther. He has beautiful passages about Our Blessed Lady in the early stages, and then it becomes what? Aggressive. The language becomes aggressive, which is not a good sign. One doesn't raise one's voice in theology. If one does, it indicates that there's some kind of incapacity to be serene going on, as though one is afraid. But what happened was this. Because he found he was gaining a following, elements of independence came in, and that's precisely where he was no longer safe. The will was seeing things which were in his eyes correct, but there were other dynamics which were contaminating the serene operation of the will. At a certain point, he was no longer able to listen to what secretly he knew. He must have known, given his formation, to be the voice of authority. He was nevertheless formed as an Augustinian monk, well formed. And we have in Rome two altars not far from each other. The altar where the aforesaid St. Maximilian Kolbe celebrated his first Mass. I actually celebrated it myself. It's beautiful, unchanged. It's where Our Lady appeared to a Jew and converted him. But he, not far away, celebrated on another altar his last Mass before leaving the church. That did not have happened. He was a Catholic priest, and he was an able man. The consequence, actually, on the level of culture, is not entirely negative. As we have coming from England, about the same time actually, the King James Version, which gave us the great standard Shakespearean English, which we still have until the time of Newman, basically. So in Germany we have the Luther Bibel, which is still actually used, a very elegant translation. We had the same thing happened actually in Wales with Bishop Morgan in 1588. Gave us the Welsh language essentially. I make a jump. In the year 2011, a beatification took place by Pope Benedict, 28th of May. It was a very interesting character, a mystic, Sister Maria Serafina Micheli. Notice those names. Her dates were 1849 to 1911. She was foundress of the Sisters of the Angels, and there's a reason for that. She had an intimate link with the angelic world and great gifts, constantly in touch with that invisible world and led by them. Now, she wasn't enclosed and she had to travel one day to a place she didn't know, Eisleben in Saxony. Now this bit she didn't know. She only saw a great concourse of people, great important people, actually including the Kaiser himself. And she only thought of one thing, as usual: I must get a tabernacle, I must have my time of intimacy with my Saviour. It was by then dusk when she got off the train or whatever she's travelling on, and she went to the nearest church. And because it was locked at dusk, she knelt in front of the door on the slabs to adore the Blessed Sacrament inside. And this is what took place. She was looking for a church in which to make a visit to Jesus. She found one, closed. She had knelt down on the slabs. While she prayed, an angel appeared. Arise, because it is a Protestant church. But I want you to see where, now, this is where she realized where she was and what was going on, where Martin Luther ended up. It was the birthday, it would have been the 4th centenary, I suppose, of his birthday on that very day, in this very place of his birth. And that's what the concourse was about. She had no idea, and so the angel had to instruct her. But I want you to see where Martin Luther was condemned and the pain he suffered as a punishment for, now notice this, for his pride. And this is going to be important in the life of this saint ever after. I'll explain that in a second. So, she was shown a terrible abyss of fire. And she saw at the very bottom of the hole Luther, who differed from others, surrounded by demons who forced him to kneel. Now, I remember being told that in France, that théologie se fait à genoux. Theology is done on one's knees. And if pride enters into it, then these other dynamics come in. High decibels, dysfunctional dialogue, screening of further truth, self-sufficiency, incapacity to listen or even to be silent, talking at and blocking out new knowledge. Why? It's a participation in the fundamental sin of Lucifer. I will not serve, non serviam, independence. So it's a microcosm of that macrocosm which led the world into a jarring note for the first time in history, when the angels fell. And by the way, Lucifer didn't think that there could be anything evil in the world. He thought he'd get away with it. He'd have his own kingdom. And that's when hell began to exist. First jarring note in the harmony of the spheres. So, all around with what? Hammers. They were trying to do something. They tried in vain to shove a big nail into the head. Now, there's no point in going on in this if it's not to indicate that she picked up the fundamental problem of the spiritual life. It's this participation in the sin of Lucifer which we call pride, and all its siblings and progeniture. Vainglory, vanity, self-centeredness, independence, and on you go. Well, when therefore she was forming her future sisters, this was the one question that she would be merciless with. She would not tolerate one grain of pride. The Lord can't be Lord until we cease to exist on the level of the will and of self-sufficiency. We die spiritually, and only then are we free. It's the whole work, actually, of a novitiate well done. I make a jump. Lucifer can use people who are not aware of who is playing with them. I leave that to your imagination and cop on as regards to what's happening and happened in the past with regard to things against the Catholic Church. But I want to come closer in time to indicate that when this happens, there are also collateral effects. That violence and aggressivity in the mind and behavior also comes into culture. What is the consequence? Well, we know here in Ireland what the consequence was. Not that far away, the massacre at Drogheda, the torture in the Tower of London, our own Oliver Plunkett, the last of a great army, all the destruction of much of the interior of our beautiful churches, statuary especially. Destruction. Destruction. The language of the other guy. Certainly not our gentle Saviour. Well, that too can be seen for what it is. This came to me the other day and moved me. It's from the north of Italy, the Turin area. You can actually see what it is, slightly. Now, listen, I'll do my best because it's in Italian. On the 11th, no, actually that's the significant date. It's the 8th of December, the Immaculate Conception, 1859. These two people, a married couple, the name is Pizio, that's the family name, became from Catholic Protestant. Actually coaxed by help financially. They were in dire straits. The same day, the father, Alberto, was trying to sell some old bits of furniture. And among these was a beautiful picture of the Blessed Virgin, painted on wood. But the people of the area, seeing the image of the Immaculate, because they were influenced by Protestantism, burst into horrendous blasphemies. And one of them tried repeatedly to break it in pieces with an axe. But the axe broke while the image remained undamaged. Infuriated, the three malevolent people threw the image in the fire. But the miracle repeated itself. The flames carbonized all the wood around, you can actually see that, but the image remained undamaged. So those who were profaning it fled, terrified. And this same Mr. Pizio tried to hide the image. It was a month later that his wife got wind of what had just happened, but she didn't believe it. And she was obstinate in her ideas. And she then went about trying to destroy it herself. She went as far as to cover it in spirit, in alcohol, and to try and put it in flames. Once again, the miracle repeated itself. Then, and then only, tormented by remorse, the couple, the two of them, took counsel from a priest who suggested that it be delivered, handed over to some person, a pious person, who would pray for them. As a result of which, they decided to consign it to the first persons who would pass by that very evening. It was actually Holy Wednesday of 1860. And what wasn't a surprise when the first who came along were these. Providence disposed that such pious persons should at that point be two religious, two nuns, from the Congregation of the Immaculate Conception, which had just been founded. From then on, the image was kept jealously by these same sisters, the which have arranged for it to be placed in a grandiose temple, which is near their own mother house. And it goes on to talk about the many prodigies that have happened ever since before it. I come closer to you again in time. It was in 1847 that an ex-Catholic, Bruno Cornocchiola, was about to give a lecture against the Blessed Virgin. He'd become an extreme Protestant. I think he belonged to a sect, the Adventists or something. And he had taken his children to Tre Fontane to buy some chocolate for them in the shop of the Trappist monks, but it was closed during the siesta, so they had to kill time. He had actually got into an aggressive mode himself, so much so that he had purchased a dagger and had inscribed on it Morte al Papa, death to the Pope, and he meant business. And because of the siesta, they were playing, the children, while he was preparing his lecture against the Blessed Virgin. Suddenly, he found it disappeared, and he went after them. And they were on their knees, immobile, looking in one direction. All he could hear was, "Bella donna, bella donna!" Beautiful lady, beautiful lady. He tried to move them, but they wouldn't be moved. They couldn't be moved physically. And then suddenly he was allowed to see what they were seeing. She kept him quite a long time, I think over an hour, and gave him an instruction which he remembered word by word for the rest of his life on what? The fullness of revelation, hence her title there, a Madonna della Rivelazione, presented always with a book in her hand. And she instructed him, also obtained for him the grace of an infused knowledge, the fullness of the Catholic faith. Notice, she said explicitly that the Catholic Church was the true church. She said so explicitly, and also that the Vicar of Rome, the Pope of Rome was the Vicar of Christ, Vicar of her Son, which then would explain how she hinted that he was to go to the said Vicar of Christ. And that would help to, as it were, bring it into the open, and that's actually what happened fairly quickly. Through a contact, he was able to go to a fairly quiet audience. There were people there, but it wasn't one of these mega ones that we have now. And at the end of the audience with Pius XII, we were asked was there anyone who had a personal word for the Holy Father, and he got up and approached him and presented him with the dagger, with Morte al Papa on it. Now, Pius XII was not entirely surprised, because the mystic soul had given him to understand a year before that this was going to happen. In some shape or form he had been warned that there was a death threat on him, but that Our Lady would intervene. Now notice that actually there were several instructions given to Bruno, and I think that one of the important ones was on the importance of what had not yet been defined, that she had been truly assumed into heaven. What's the dates? What happened? Possibly, pushed on also by this, we defined it in 1950 on the Feast of All the Saints, and obviously heaven was very close to earth at that point, indicating to us also that although, and remember, although grace is present all across the Christian board, where people try, according to the lights that they have, to praise and honour Jesus Christ, the positive will of God is explicit, and if one perceives it, one cannot remain with an incomplete truth. And that was what was given to the mind, the brilliant mind of John Henry Newman. After a while, a long while, the conversation in his head was this: not am I part of a branch which is part of a great church, the Anglican being a branch, not am I in continuity with the church fathers, not whether am I perhaps the equivalent of one of the Donatists. The question was this: can I remain where I am and be saved? Because he was shown that one cannot go against the light and be safe. And that's the bit that quite often these loud noises, incapacity to dialogue, high decibels indicate. People will not face the whole truth in case. So if we're ever in a discussion with any brethren across the board, never should we raise our voice. The most convicting argument of all, and the most disarming, is perfect, unperturbed serenity.